This is Asia Tech Podcast. Graham Brown and Anne Morgan. Anne, welcome back.
Oh, thank you. Great to be here.
It's great to have you here. We're talking about podcast guests today, how to get them, who you should have on the show, what makes a good guest, and what should the follow-up be from a guest as well. We were just chatting off air about good guests to get on the show and not so good guests. Apparently, I want your thoughts on this. The worst guest, and if he's listening, apologies to this, to get on your show, your talk show, is Tom Cruise. What do you think about that? He's the megastar, the highest paid actor ever, but not necessarily the best guest.
I must start by saying I think Tom Cruise is amazing.
Yeah, I agree with
you. And every movie he does is just such good fun. But I think it's the control. It's the publicists, the media training he's had, the years and years that he's been doing this. He's just not going to go off message. And really what you're looking for is a conversation rather than, some trite comments that fit into the image side of things.
But don't you think the fact he has all that training makes for good conversation? You're not going to have somebody who can't talk. Obviously, that's a challenge, isn't it? You don't know if somebody can actually articulate themselves. He's actually a very clearly spoken person. You watch a lot of movies and people mumble like, yeah. It's very clear, isn't he? So he would be good.
He is great. And actually, I saw him on Top Gear once.
Right.
And the funniest thing was, of course, I think it was him and Cameron Diaz. They were just startlingly good looking compared to everyone else. Painfully so, especially the team there. But he was very animated and great fun. And I think if you can capture that in somebody, capture something that they really want to talk about. Yeah. And he loves cars. So maybe it's just steering it round to a topic that.
It's a safe space for him, isn't it?
Yes.
Because he knows it's not going to go off into those subjects he doesn't want to talk about.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because one of the questions people ask when they are starting a podcast is, who should I get on my podcast? And I thought about this, and I think there's 3 types of guests, and they sort of follow an order in terms of how you usually grow a podcast. There's the network, so people you know. Then there's people you can approach who you know of, and then there's the referrals that they know. So that sort of process. So you start with the people you know, then you go and hunt down the names in the industry. Oh, that's a great guest. I want to get that person on. And then there's the people who you ask and say, who do you think would be a great guest for my show? So we'll work through that, but let's talk about the type of people you want to get on your show. So you've had one.
Well, I now have had 2 guests.
2? Oh, right. Progress, update. Come on.
Massive. So, and actually, Graham, I have to first of all thank you, because I think that one of the things you can do is overthink it too much. And we had a conversation off air after the last lesson, and I mentioned that there was quite a high-profile person in town who is a good friend of a friend of mine, but he didn't know me. So you just said, well, why don't you just ask him? And I was, oh, no, I can't do that. He doesn't know who I am. And, oh, my goodness. And then I just thought, you know what, Anne, grow a pair. And I went to see...
I'm glad you said that, not me.
Yeah. So I went to see him speak. And I made some notes. So it was a really good opportunity to sort of get underneath his story a little bit more. And then afterwards, I plucked up the courage and I said to him, and he was only in Singapore for 24 hours. And I said, if you have like 20 minutes tomorrow, would you be prepared to talk to me? And you know what? He said yes.
Yes. Come on, Anne.
Come on.
Awesome.
And it was awesome.
Was that your pitch? Was that...
Well,
how did you say it?
I tell you what I did. I did start by referencing the fact that I knew his, obviously, so I put myself in context. I know Martin, and I know you know Martin.
Right.
And he said, oh, yes, of course, and Martin has mentioned you. So that did help. It wasn't completely cold. And then we got chatting about him and his life, and he'd written a book, and I managed to read like 3 or 4 chapters of the book before we met the next day. And then we just recorded a conversation.
Wow.
So
That's so cool.
It was cool. It was such good fun, and I'll not lie. It felt very uncomfortable. In that, I think we all want to be perfect before we start on anything. You know, or there's that feeling of, oh, I really need to have done 40 hours of preparation, or I'd love to have met this guy in a year's time when I'm a bit more proficient. But I think you have to take the opportunities when they present themselves. And this was an opportunity that was not going to come around for me again. This guy lives in Geneva.
Yeah.
So it was now or never. And, it was in my own way, plugging in the lapel mics. We had no chance to sort of do a lot of preparation because he was literally going for a meeting, 25 minutes later.
Wow.
So it was just bang into the, get the mics on and then just start chatting.
Right. So I have so many questions I want to ask you about that.
Mm-hmm.
First one is have you listened back to it? Make sure it did actually record?
Yes, I have. Not to all of it because...
But it recorded?
But it did record, yes. It did record because that was the thing.
Yeah, you don't want to do the whole thing.
And I had no time, and that was a danger.
Yeah.
I would never, obviously, I would love to be much, much better prepared next time. But
in those circumstances, you pulled it off.
Yes.
That's awesome. I'm really proud of you, Anne.
Oh,
That's
thank
fantastic.
you. Yeah.
So let's sort of unpack that a little bit, because I know it's it's a one-time occurrence, but hopefully more of the same. But I think what you've done is you've broken through in many ways a psychological barrier. Like you've said to me, like, oh, I'm not sure if I can ask this guy, and we had that chat as well, and you built him up to be this big thing, and he is in many ways, and he's an author and he lives in Geneva, so he's just here for a short time. The pressure's there, no room to make a mistake. But you asked, he said yes, you did the interview. Afterwards, how do you feel about that whole process? Do you feel differently about approaching people like that? Does it feel a lot, more sort of, tangible that you can do this again? Or, would you approach them in a different way?
It certainly does feel more tangible now. And I think, yes, I would approach in a slightly different way. I'd like to have a better idea of where I'm going, which is still a little bit opaque. But, I think the whole experience of actually doing rather than thinking is incredible. And every time I practically do something like this, it pushes me on a bit further. So in a way, I think, yes, you can be a bit more strategic, of course, in where you're going with these things. But sometimes you just have to grasp the metal and do it, and do it now, because tomorrow might be too late. And I think that's the one thing this has given me, this experience, is a bit more of a sense of excitement, immediacy. And what have you got to lose? If they say no, they say no. It's fine. Move on to the next one. But if you're presented with an opportunity that isn't going to be around forever, then it's always worth, as long as you apply, as long as you make sure that you're not inconveniencing them too much. Right. And for me, I'm always, the other thing that I would look at is, how can you possibly give back a little bit? For me, it was, I did actually buy 3 or 4 copies of his book, to give as gifts. I mean, it's at that time of year now, and those things, and and I will try and play it back in other ways as much as I can. And I think that's the other thing to bear in mind, that it's you have to think of the reciprocal part of it as well. Right.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you, because one of the questions that comes up in people's minds when they speak to people or interview them is, what's in it for them? Like, this is almost like they're doing me a favor as the podcast host, and that sort of mindset can be a little bit of a barrier, because if you approach somebody and you say, please be on my podcast, I want to talk to you and find out about your background and so on, you feel like they're doing you a favor, therefore you kind of owe them something. So how do we get through that? Because now that you've done that interview with your guest, has in any way your thoughts about you and your role to them and your value to them change? You know, like before they were like creating content for your podcast. Now, do you see it different in any way?
Yes, I think I do actually. I think I think in the world we live in now, people need. I just think it's such a lovely thing to do, to have something recorded. You know, it's a point in history. It's a conversation that is permanent, and I think it's got more permanency than, you know, a 30-second video or you know, short form media, and you know, it can be used in many different ways. And I think I'm starting to see that now, that the value of it, you know, and you know, you have to be quite creative on that front. You know, where can this go? Where can I put it that is going to be absolutely beneficial for the guest? And that's what it's about, really. You know, I mean, I mean, depends why you're doing it. But if you can think of something that's going to be beneficial for your guests, then wow, what a win!
Yeah,
you know, and I think it's worth, you know, being a bit creative on that front.
Well, that's a key point, and I think that's sort of a great sort of step forward in the podcasting journey, is realizing you're actually of value to them as much as they are to you. It's a win-win, really, rather than one-sided. I think if you go in one-sided, you can also approach the podcast one-sided in the sense that you're the interviewer, and then it's kind of like a PR interview, and they're, you know, they can treat it in that respect as well. But if you see it as like, okay, we can really help each other here. That's what I've learned in doing podcasts. I mean, doing over 400, I realised that one thing I've learned, Anne, is that actually I think that when I go and speak to people, originally when I was doing the podcast, I thought, oh, I'm just kind of like another person interviewing them. But actually, you know, I realise now when I do the interviews is that I'm probably the only person who actually asks them about them. Right? Because they're doing all these PR interviews out there, but nobody is actually asking about them, the person. Okay, tell me about, so you grew up in Manchester or Liverpool, whatever, you know, tell me about that. Nobody actually asks that stuff. Nobody asks them about that sort of backstory, you know, how I got there, you know, why I did this, that journey. It's also about, so tell us about this product release or this launch or this new deal with this company and so on. So I think that's something that's missing as a podcaster. You can go in and say, actually, you know, let's just put all this stuff aside. I'm really interested in you. They're like, okay, what do you mean? He said, I want to learn about you and your why. And nobody ever asked this. So I think that's a real value add as well to sort of focus on, because it's not therapy, but in many ways, it's like an opportunity for them to tell their story. And you mentioned the key word here, PR. You know, we talked about Tom Cruise. They're surrounded by this coterie of, you know, these yes people, and they can't break out of it. But you sit in a podcast, you give them an opportunity to tell their story in an unbridled way. So I think that's a really powerful, you know, value that you can offer to a guest.
Yeah, and that's a wonderful way of putting it, because I think that's what you end up with, is a dialogue that is very personal, but very different from that narrow sort of tramway. If they have a high profile and they're here, you know, or they're trying to promote something, and you're right, you know, then that's where all the interviews are going to go. You know, they have to, because everyone's attention span is decreasing. So this is, you know, I think podcasting and broadcasting is one of the few areas where perhaps people will give it more attention.
Yeah,
so
engage, personal. That's
exactly.
Key.
Yeah.
Well, I've noticed. I mean, we'll talk about the tools for guest management in a minute. Before we get there, is that there's a real trend at the moment in media that there's. And we talked about this before off air. Is that there are an increasing number of programs which are focusing on making celebrities normal, like making them more personal. like whether it's, you know, a celebrity singing karaoke in a car, or Paul McCartney was recently with James Corden, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And, you know, it's like, because they have such a huge presence, it's Paul McCartney, it's the Beatles, it's Sir Paul, all that stuff. But then to sit them in the car and be normal, it's like, apart from being an amazing like marketing tool for them and their brand, I think they really enjoy it. It's like none of the BS. I don't want to do all this stuff like, you know, the makeup, and I just want to sit in here and have a chat. So there seems to be like a huge push in that direction in certain areas of media as well. Like we're seeing it, like Will Smith is doing this now on YouTube, like this personal channel with no, you know, interference from PR. So I think podcasting can count itself as part of that, and not edit itself to become the other media, but double down on that unedited version, and understand that people actually want to do this stuff, right? And they actually want to come out as themselves rather than, you know, what everybody knows them as. So I think that's what we've got to focus on here.
Yeah, and it would be wonderful if you can get people to reveal that about themselves and relax and enjoy it, and talk about something that is, I mean, it's not easy, you know, to relax somebody to talk about their personal, you know, little nuggets of things that they perhaps keep hidden most of the time. But if you can get a piece of recording like that, then it's just a joy to listen to as well.
Well, you did a good job as well. I mean, I'm going back to what you did in your approach. Again, we'll come to the tools in a minute. Is that a key part in approaching the guest is de-risking it. And whether or not you saw it as de-risking it, you did the job of that, which is, first of all, you said, look, I know these people, which you know, which means that, you know, I'm less of a risk, i.e., you're not going to come on my show and I'm going to make a fool of you or ask you stupid questions, or, you know, I'm really going to screw up. So you've de-risked it. You've shown them that there's a mutual contact. That's always really important. And you've also shown that you did the work. You did the homework, you read the book, and you talked about what you know about them, which is another de-risking process as well. So I always do that when I approach guests as well. Say, hey, look, this is who I know, or these are the people that have been on the show. This is what I know about you. Let's talk about that. That's really important, because I think those may be basic skills in day-to-day networking. But when a lot of people get approached to see it from their angles, they just get these sort of very spammy emails or LinkedIn messages, which are sort of like irrelevant to them, right? Be on my podcast. It's about this. It's not like I've taken time to find out about you. Therefore, you know, I'm going to give you what it takes when it comes to the interview, right? So I think the de-risking is really important, because these people get approached all the time by different people, and they don't know whether or not you're a joker or whether you're going to be really good at this. So I know you mentioned it, and maybe I don't know if you consciously thought of doing that, but that's a key part of the guest approach.
Yeah, I didn't actually think too much about it, and that probably was a benefit. If I'd thought more about it, I probably wouldn't have done it. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense, actually.
Right.
And so I have a question for you, Graham. So if I was lucky because I was able to have a conversation face to face, but if you're approaching somebody, you know, either, you know, on the phone or more likely, of course, in an email, how would you do that?
You don't know this person.
And you don't know them. Yeah.
But you want them on your show.
Yeah.
The approach email is key. It's really important to keep it short and not mess around. And so where do you get the leads from? So let's just say this is a name you know in your industry. You want them on the show. There's a couple of ways of doing this. One way I do it is if they've been on another podcast, which is a really good sign that they enjoy podcasts, right? Mm-hmm. I say, hey, Bob, I saw you on Anne's podcast. I listened to you on Anne's podcast. Really liked what you talked about. I would like you to come onto my podcast and do the same. How about it? That's pretty much the basics of what I'd ask them. That is a highly effective email. Yeah. Because you don't know if people like podcasting or know what it is, but if somebody's been on a podcast already, that significantly increases your chances So there's another part in it about where you find guests. One way is to go and look at other people's podcasts and get the guests from there. Absolutely fine. It's a great way of getting pre-qualified leads, people, great guests with stuff to talk about. If they haven't been on a podcast, then you have to think about what's the other way of doing it. You can say, hey, I saw you speak at this conference, or I saw you wrote an article. So I heard you were writing an article about travel in Asia. I'd like to talk a little bit about that. That's another approach. You've got to find the hook, that they've put something out there and you want to kind of relate to that. That significantly increases your chances. But always keep it short, and always, I think the action point in that email is, are you in? Does this sound interesting? Do you like the sound of this? It's a yes or no. I'd like to invite you as a guest. Yes or no. Are you interested? Not let's book in a time and everything. Just get them interested in principle, yes or no. Not how are we going to do it or whatever. Get a conversation going with them. So I usually send a 3 or 4 line email with a yes/no response at the end of it.
Yeah, great, good. That sounds really good advice, actually, because no one wants to be having to plough through a huge email that it's just going to just be deleted.
Yeah, 2 pages of.
You
keep it short, and if you don't know them, then you need to sell it a little bit more. And I'd usually say something like, so Anne, love to invite you to this podcast. I saw you speak on this podcast. It's great. Please come over and do the same. I'd like to talk about your journey, your story, why you left Manchester and went to Liverpool, those kind of things. So people just scan the podcast, scan the email. So if that word jumps out, Manchester, oh, okay. Otherwise, it would just been spam. So you've got to sort of put in those words which is going to make them jump out. Oh, let's talk about HR tech. For example, if that was your bag, then, that would be the word that jumps out at me. So those are the kind of things that I'd put seed in the email to get people's attention. So a little bit of a, trial and error through sending thousands of these emails over time.
Yep.
But I think the most important thing about approaching people is the process. So a lot of podcasters I know, where they come unstuck with, getting guests on the show, is that they don't have a process. They sort of do it randomly. And that's okay if you want to do a random podcast. But if you want to sort of, do a regular one, then you need to kind of get a process in there. So what are your plans? Are you planning to do like weekly, monthly? Do you have a sort of schedule?
I would love to do a weekly podcast. And I'm still a little bit uncertain as to exactly how to target it, to be honest. So at the moment, I've got 4 or 5 people that I've got lined up, all very different. So I'm just going through the process of interviewing, well, not interviewing them, but having these conversations that we will edit, and then through the process of actually at least doing something, I think the pathway will become clearer for me.
Absolutely, yeah. But then you work out what kind of pathway's right for you, right?
Yeah.
Whether you want to do weekly or you want to do a batch or
exactly.
however you want to do it.
And not even that. It's more to do with the kind of subject matter and how am I going to sort of target's one word, but what am I looking? What are these podcasts about? What's the kind of message? What kind of, who's going to be interested in this?
Right. So
kind of
these are the most important questions, right? And so we spoke about it earlier, didn't we? About being creative and how creativity and these sort of important human questions sit on top of a lot of structure, which we don't see. We talked about Stephen King as an example, the author, how he gets up in the morning and writes 2,000 words a day. Nobody sees that. They only see like his work, right? Best-selling author of all time, right? Whether you like him or not, you can't deny the facts, right?
No, definitely not.
So that is key, isn't it? It's the same with podcasting, is the points you make about, what it should be about, the conversations, the relationships with the people and so on, is more important than, filling in an Excel spreadsheet, right? However, the Excel spreadsheet and that sort of structure is really important because once you get that right, then all the other stuff sort of flows. But I liken podcasting to like spinning plates. You know, you're spinning many different plates on those sticks, right?
Right.
Like they used to have in those game shows, the kids in the day, right? And, you know, one of those plates is going to be getting guests. One of those guests is actually doing the recording. One's going to be editing. One's going to be publishing. And so you've got like 7 or 8 different plates going on at the same time. And once you sort of like, you know, one's kind of like, oh no, you know, it's kind of falling off. The other one's like going. So the whole thing sort of falls apart. So I see a lot of people who start a podcast, start spinning those plates. They do like 6 episodes and then they stop. And you say, why? They said, well, you know, I was too busy doing that and momentum died and the novelty wears out.
Yeah.
You know, and like 2 months in, they think, oh, you know, I've got like 4 episodes in the inbox to do, and I just kind of lost, you know, my heart for it, right? So it's really important to get the process right. And I'll share with you a couple of tips that I use, the tools that I use. I can reveal how I do it. And this is not for everybody, but this is what I use. I use an Excel spreadsheet, simple, or, you know, Google sheet, right? And in that, simple, name of the guest, email address, status. You know, so if they booked in, if I sent an email, if I'm waiting for a reply, all those kind of things. So you have a look at my sheet and it will have like all the names down there, right? And so I know where everybody is in that stage. I'm waiting for a reply, waiting to book, you know, booked in the show, right? So it's just simple stuff, right? So I don't have to worry. Look, I know that Anne's booked in on the 12th and, you know, that's fine. It's dealt with. I'm not sort of occupying a little bit of my head with like, what's going on with Anne, right?
Yeah.
So that's simple. So get some structure in there. And then you can focus on all the nice stuff, right? And the other thing as well is that use a booking calendar. Have you used anything like this, like Calendly or Schedule Once or anything like that?
No, I haven't actually. I just tend to use an Outlook calendar. Or,
Right.
Yeah, or just a calendar on my phone and just, you know, book things in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it does make, I mean, to get some momentum, it would make a lot of sense to use a booking calendar, yeah.
Yeah, so what I do, I mean, I started using my calendar, like Google Calendar, and then what I found was, firstly, that sometimes you get people in different time zones. If you're doing that, that's an issue. And then secondly as well is that too much time was spent trying to work out a time where I felt it easy. Just send them a link, book them in, dealt with. Then I can focus on chatting with them. Yeah. So what I find, for example, my approach for the podcast is and I saw you did Bob's podcast. I really liked what you talked about, that theme. I'd like you to come onto my podcast. Are you interested? Does this interest you? Email. You send back, yeah. You know, that's your response. I usually say, shoot me a yes if you're interested. You come back and say, yes, question mark. I mean, or yes, exclamation mark, or yes, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. You get all the kind of different responses. You can gauge that. Then I'll send an email back and say, all right, easiest way you can do this is, here's my link to book in a calendar using, you know, what's available. Pick a time. Once you're booked in, let's talk about content. So just focusing on get them booked in. Once they're booked in, then we can chat about what we're going to chat about. But what I find is that it may sound a bit more forceful, like in the process, but at the end of the day, it works. And I've gone from like a 10% success rate. So for example, if I send 10 emails, 1 will book in. Mm-hmm. I've gone from a 10% to a 50% success rate. Wow. So if I send 10 emails, 5 will book in through this process. So if you think about what that does for you in terms of time management and saving time, and it now enables us to focus on the chit chat and the good stuff and the creativity. Yeah. So I think, you know, going back to all podcasters, get the process right, because this is what people don't see, and this is why podcasts fail. You know, get that right. You know, put it Excel spreadsheet, Calendly, and then, you know, you not constantly chasing your tail for guests. And once you get referrals as well, the whole thing just sort of like turns itself over.
Oh, that sounds great. You know, that whole thing of having that pipeline as well, so that you don't reach the wall where you've just not got anybody. You know, you're constantly refreshing it and moving it on. and that gives you the momentum to keep producing. Because that must be awful if you just get to the stage where you think, oh my goodness, I've got nothing in the pipeline. I just don't know where to go anymore. And life will just come in, and that, your podcast will just stop because you'll get distracted onto something else, or you'll lose confidence. Whereas if you're in a momentum situation, then you'll keep building your confidence and building your expertise, and but within a process. So it's not scattergun. You're not sort of, and for me that sounds. I think that just sounds such great advice, because I think it's too easy to be enthusiastic about something, but to not have a process, and then your enthusiasm will carry you so far, but you will burn out on that.
You're so right there, Anne. I don't know who said it, but somebody once said motivation is for amateurs.
Yeah.
And it was a creative guy.
Yeah.
How important it's the discipline, isn't it? You think that just being motivated is enough.
Exactly. I think people think that anybody who is remotely creative, that it just sort of, that they get bolts of lightning into their heads, and then
muses.
Exactly. The muse is on them and they create. But I think, a lot of super creative people, the difference between the amateur creative and the professional creative is a proper structure and system.
Yeah, that's the difference.
It's every day doing, every day.
Yeah.
And not trusting to your own willpower as well. I mean, it's trusting to the process, so that will help you to keep going when, throughout the whole year, or throughout the week, or throughout, however long a period you're going to do this kind of thing. Actually having a structure and a process behind you will take you. You made the point. You're not having to engage your own brain all of the time and remember, and the process will carry you through the nuts and bolts of it, while you concentrate on the creative side of it, like the conversational side of it, and the rest of it, you've entrusted to your process. This is real, and this is something that faces us as well as professionals, entrepreneurs as well. Decision fatigue. It's real. It exists. And I read an article, Obama, when he was in the White House, apparently he had 2 coloured suits, dark charcoal and dark blue, like a navy blue. And every morning he had 2 boiled eggs for breakfast. And they asked him why, because it sounds a bit OCD. He said, well, look, I'm making thousands of decisions every day, one of which is, do I press that button, that nuclear? Yeah, exactly.
Do you want me worried about what I'm having for breakfast? And it's the same with us, isn't it? If we're worried about, oh no, do I send that email to Anne, or do I do this, or do I follow up? You take all that sort of decision fatigue. Decision making is an energy, isn't it? And the more we do it, the less of it we have during the day, and it resets every morning, right?
Right.
So it's the same with this, is that, if you want to keep the process going, if you want to keep the show on the road, you have to have a really strong process behind you. And I think this is what people don't get with podcasting, is that this exists. Have that process in place. So, have the structure. And there's a bit we haven't talked about as well, keeping that turning. So you're not there yet. I mean, you've done 2 guests, you've got a few in the pipeline.
Yep.
And I think it's cool to talk about it in the pipeline and these sort of analogies, because that's exactly what it is, right? You're building a show and it has a process, right? What do you do when you have people on, keep this thing turning? Because there's only so much you can keep hustling guests, right? And everybody has their own personal network, and that'll run dry.
Yes, of course.
At some point.
Yeah.
And you've asked me 5 times to be on your podcast, and I said no. So how do you get new people on? Referral. So I think this is, again, another missed opportunity with many podcasts, is asking for referrals, because often you can get great guests through existing guests. So what I do is, when somebody comes on the podcast, straight away, not during the show, I used to do that, off air obviously, but straight after, I said, and great to have you in the studio, had fun, really enjoyed talking about would love to know if you know of somebody who could also be a good guest on the show. Who could you recommend? some people don't say anybody. Some people say, let me think about it. Some people say, I need to ask. But some people come back with loads of names. And it's fantastic because then you go to that person and recommended me Bob. So I go to Bob, and Bob, my approach is, I've just had Anne on the show. We had a lot of fun. And I asked her, who would you recommend to be a great guest? And Anne said, you. Your name came up. How about it? And that is a very, very high success rate email or approach. So referrals is a great way to get people on the show. And the other part about referrals as well is that if Bob comes on the show, chances are Anne will listen to it as well. Mm-hmm. And Bob will go back and listen to Anne's show. So that creates a bit of connectivity there as well. Yeah. So have you thought about referrals?
No, but that makes so much sense. And it's what you were saying before, Graham, as well. It's the de-risking. You're not completely unknown at that point. If Bob's been on and then Bob's recommended you, then it creates some confidence.
Yeah.
And it creates some social proof, and you are less of an unknown quantity.
Yeah. And it's also their reputation now.
Yeah.
So if Anne recommended Bob and Bob said, oh no, I'm not very good, he's not going to turn around and say that. So it's because he's now entrusting you, Anne, as the referee of that in his sort of capability and ability on the show as well. So that's a huge de-risk for him. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that for everybody out there, referrals. So the two key takeaways from today is the process is to have those tools. I would look at Calendly. I think there's a free version of it. You can certainly use that. It integrates with your calendar. Easy to book in. They can pick a time in their time zone, or that matches up with the windows that you set out for them. So if you say, look, I only want to do podcasts on a Tuesday or at these times, you can set that in the calendar. So when they get it, they can match it with their calendar and say, oh, here, this works. They book in and it gets reminders sent out and everything. So that's a great tool. There's many other tools like that, and referrals. And with those, I think you have pretty much, the basic tools to build a process there.
Fantastic. Yeah. And all I would say is, when you're at the beginning of this process, is be brave and ask, and people will either say yes or no. And to get you going, you might be surprised at who would say yes. So It's just really have a go.
Have a go. Do you feel more confident that people are going to say yes to you now?
Yes, I do actually. Yes, yeah. I feel much more confident now.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about people slightly outside of my network. So in other words, it's taking that step away from friends to people.
Yeah, that's the test, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. It certainly is a test when when you're not known to the person you want to have on your podcast.
Yeah, it's at the early stages. Start with your network, then go to if you feel confident, go and ask these people now. That's great. Mm-hmm. What will happen as well is that you'll start asking people, and they'll say, yeah, I listen to your podcast, and that de-risked completely. Those are great guests as well. That will come in time. And then you're going to get the people who say, can I be on your podcast?
Oh, wow. That would be something.
That happens, yeah.
Yeah.
But these are great situations to be. So, you have all those sort of things working together. You're more confident to go and ask. People know you more. Therefore, you're more likely to get success. People refer you. And then you get the inbounds as well, which are all bonuses because you can say yes or no to those guys.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And great. Thank you so much for sharing your progress with us today. Where do we go from here in terms of your podcast? Give us an update.
So I've got another one on Thursday. So and really what I need to do now is put into a schedule, how am I going to publish these?
Yeah.
Where am I going with next steps? So, I want to get maybe 6 ready. And then the next step will be, how do I then put them out to the world?
That's next then.
That's next.
That's our next lesson. We're going to talk about distributing podcasts. So we're going to talk about iTunes, Spotify, all those platforms that you need to get out to and how you do it.
Yeah.
So there you go.
That would be exciting.
Anne, thank you so much.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you.